Hello and welcome to GuyLogicGaming. My name is Temko and this is Gaming the System. The difference between refresh rate and frame rate. What is one, what is the other, and what does it mean for your gaming performance? This is a new series we're running here on GuyLogicGaming where we try to explain certain technical things to you so you know what you're into when you're looking at buying a new game or looking at tweaking the performance or settings of your favorites of old and new. Today we are talking about refresh rate, what it means for your monitor, and what it may mean for your computers and your frame rate, because these are slightly different things, but they are related to one another. First things first, let's explain what each of these things is. Frame rate, or FPS, is the amount of times your graphics card can draw a new frame and push it to your monitor. And in essence, a frame is a still image, it's a picture. But when placing all these pictures one behind the other really fast, you get movement, much like on a movie, much like on any other moving media. It's a still image repeated very fast, so that tricks your eyes in thinking there's movement. And generally speaking, frame rate is considered to be the gold standard when looking at PC performance. If you're playing PC games, you want to look at 60 FPS. If you really can deal with it, you may look at 30 FPS. And if you want higher performance or more smoothness in your animations and more smoothness in your movement, you look at 120 FPS. But why do these numbers matter? Well, arguments aside of what is what and what does what, rendering more frames requires a stronger graphics cards because it needs to do more work in the same amount of time. It's 60 FPS, frames per second. That means if it's doing 30 FPS, it does half the work, and that is the reason why you have fluctuating FPS in games. And your computer is just gonna push out a frame to your monitor saying, yeah, new one is done, new one is done, new one is done, go ahead and draw this one, go ahead and draw this one. Your monitor, on the other hand, runs off a refresh rate measured in hertz, and most monitors on the market run at 60 hertz. You have plenty of monitors right now that run at 85, 90, 120, and even some that run at 240 hertz. The hertz that your monitor runs at basically says how many times per second it will redraw its own screen. That means that if your computer is sending a new frame over, even if it's sending 500 frames per second on an older title maybe, if your monitor has a refresh rate of 60 hertz, it's only ever going to redraw itself 60 times. Which means that tweaking performance to be about in line with your monitor is always the best idea because you get the most out of the game graphically while not diminishing the effects of it because your monitor is not going to be able to handle being able to redraw itself more times than the refresh rate it offers. This is where high refresh rate monitors come into play, and there's two more things we need to take into account when we do that, because higher refresh rate obviously means it needs to draw itself multiple times, which means that the graphics card rendering the game has to be able to keep up with that. If your monitor is rendering at 60 Hz and you send it 500 frames, it's not gonna care, it's still gonna draw itself 60 times. But if your monitor is trying to draw itself 60 times and you're only sending 48 frames, it's gonna have to reuse a previous frame for a new draw moment within that same second. This of course causes stuttering effects, and even in other scenarios where your graphic card is sending a new frame over to the monitor, while that monitor is redrawing itself at that moment, you get screen tearing. Now I'll make a separate video that talks about G-Sync, V-Sync, and FreeSync and how to handle screen tearing, but suffice to say that this mismatch and overlap can result in a less than stellar experience. But how does more frames result in a better gaming experience? Why would that matter? Why is there a difference between the gameplay experience you have at 30 frames versus the one at 60 frames? And there's two main arguments for this. Even counting aside all the various extra arguments taken with this, the main difference is that when your computer draws more frames per second, it means that there's less delay between certain actions you take and the amount of time those actions require in your computer before they appear on your screen. This is generally referred to as input lag. It's not really lag though. When you press a mouse action to shoot a gun in a shooter game, your computer sends that to your graphics card. It tells it, yo, this bullet was shot, animate this effect and send it over to the monitor to render. If you're doing that at 30 frames per second, you will have a delay of about 33 milliseconds before that action can ever appear on screen. It could be longer because it may take time to do something or maybe other effects take place, but the barest minimum of time a certain action done before it displays on your computer is 33 milliseconds. And if you're not in luck, it may be quite a bit longer. But when you're drawing 60 frames per second, because you're drawing twice as many, the bare minimum time it requires between frames is suddenly 16 and some milliseconds. When you're drawing 120 frames, it's about 8 milliseconds, and 240, etc., etc., it halves the refresh time required down for the next frame. That means that your animations on screen are smoother because more smaller increments are displayed on screen. A game running at 60 FPS feels smoother than one running at 30. And because of the way games run off FPS and your actions react to the FPS on a game as opposed to a movie, you can react faster and respond more easily to different things. If your opponent ducks around the corner and ducks back in CSGO at 30 FPS, that's going to take a lot longer to reach you graphically, visually on your screen than it does at 240 frames. That is the most basic reason why you might want to look at upgrading to 120 or 240 Hz monitor. Now there are massive diminishing returns when you do this. As I said, the difference between 30 FPS and 60 FPS is pretty evident. That's a cut from 33 milliseconds down to 16.5. But the cut from 16 to 8, 60 Hz to 120 Hz is 8 milliseconds. From 120 to 140 is less than 4 milliseconds. So this means that, quite frankly, the further you get, the more diminishing returns you have. Now currently in gaming, the sweet spot is considered to be 60 or 120. 60 FPS is the bare minimum. This is smooth, accepted frame rate that any game should strive towards. That said, moving from 60 to 120 is not as impactful as 30 to 60, and yet it is still very impactful. Gameplay feels smoother, response time is better, and especially if you play competitive games from League of Legends to CSGO, the reduced input lag between your actions and your opponent actions and the time they display on screen is crucial to be able to perform at the highest levels. Now, why should you care about refresh rate? Why should you care about monitors? Can you just plumb down a new monitor, plug it in your graphics card, and suddenly play at 120 Hz? There's two things to keep in note here. One, obviously your graphics card for the game you're playing has to be able to handle the very high-end refresh rates, because right now, moving up to 4K gaming at 120 Hz basically doesn't exist. Even a 1080 Ti is not going to be able to render the amount of frames necessary to provide that smooth experience. We're still moving up to that level. Much like 4K TV, the source material and the power output to do it in that level just isn't there yet. But 1080p at 120 Hz versus 1080p at 60 Hz is already a massive difference, and you might want to look into that sort of thing. And if you're unsure about refresh rates, frame rates, and what they mean for you and why you should care about high refresh rate monitors in gaming, I hope this video helped you out in some way to look at your games, your gameplay experience, and maybe even give you some ideas of where your next upgrade for your favorite rig might come from. I hope you enjoyed this video. There will be many more to come in Gaming the System, where we explain a certain technical component to you and hope you find it useful. Thank you for watching. If you like this video, press that like button down below. If you want to see more content like this on the channel, press that subscribe button as well while you're at it. And if you want to support us to continue making ad-free content forever, check us out on Patreon. There's a link in the description down below. So I wish you a good day, and until next time, right here on GuyLogicGaming.